We don't get much information. It's tonight, not tomorrow, because they're so hot tomorrow. January.
Yeah, because I'm
No.
Good evening everyone, and welcome to St George's Anglican Church here in East Ivanhoe. As the vicar, my name is John Sanderson. I'm in a very enviable position this evening in that a few minutes ago it was suggested to me I delay the start of the service, or the lecture, because so many people are coming to church. And so it's wonderful to see so many people here. So we'll have a slow and steady introduction as people make their way from their cars here into this church. For those of you who haven't been here before, a very warm welcome in particular. If you want to know a little bit about the church, designed by Robin Boyd and Frederick Bromberg in 1963, built through 63-64, designed to enable whatever went on inside to shine out into the world, and hence all the clear low-level glass we have all around us. And so the chancery and sanctuary act as a stage, and tonight we'll be welcoming Sister Brigid Arthur to be our 2024 Lent Richard McKinney Memorial Lecture, and a little bit about Sister Brigid in a moment. So Sister Brigid will have the stage and be able to shine out into the If you need the facilities, I'm pleased to announce they're brand new, and you just go out the doors to my right, your left, and just in the courtyard door and in the corridor on your left, brand new ladies and gents facilities. At the conclusion of the lecture this evening, we hope that many of you will stay around for conversation with one another, to maybe meet one or two new people, maybe ask Sister Brigid some further questions, and enjoy some light refreshments. If you wish to make a donation to defray the costs of this evening, you're welcome to do so. Please don't feel obliged, and there are collection plates at the entrance to the church. When Sister Brigid came in here, she wondered how she would go. I've got some good news for you. It's a small world. If it all goes wrong, your senior counsel, your KC, is next door as we speak. Bernie's in the hall, and he'll dash over and look after you. So a good friend of ours who uses our hall, and he's acted in many cases where Sister Brigid has been the plaintiff. He's absolutely thrilled that you were here, and he's going to jump online later on to watch this talk. So to all of those of you who are joining us online across the city and indeed around the world, good evening and welcome to you from St George Peace Memorial Church here in Melbourne. For the benefit of the audience here, we have nearly 200 subscribers on our YouTube channel, some who live in Vanuatu, France, the United Kingdom, the United States, Germany, and indeed across Melbourne and the eastern side of Australia. This land of ours, not ours really, or is it ours? That's an interesting question. We gather here tonight on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who have never ceded sovereignty of the land to anyone. And so we acknowledge their leaders past, present and emerging, and pay our respects to their traditions, and thank them for their friendship in this community and this part of God's kingdom known as East Ivanhoe. I would like to offer a prayer at the beginning of this lecture this evening, and partly it's motivated by world events, and particularly the war that we can see in Europe and the Holy Land, and also part in memory to the man whose lecture this lecture is delivered in, Richard McKinney. Richard McKinney was a dear friend of many who are here this evening. This was his parish church. He was the Dean of Trinity College Theological School here in Melbourne. But importantly, he was a Belfast boy, born and bred, a province of the United Kingdom that suffered what was known as the Troubles for many decades, and now thankfully is in a time of peace, so peace is possible. So in recognition of the global situation and in memory of our dear friend Richard, who lived in a troubled land, I offer this prayer for this evening. Let us pray. God of light and salvation, our refuge and our strength, we pray this night for the people of Israel and Palestine amid the ongoing violence in that place. We pray for those killed and injured by rockets from Gaza and southern Israel. May your royal staff comfort them. We pray for those who are grieving. May they know your ever-present help. We pray for the protection of those who have been taken hostage by Hamas. As they walk through this dark valley, may they fear no evil. And we pray for the civilians of Gaza, for the men, the women and the children. May they know that their help comes from the Maker of heaven and earth. And we pray for those in positions of leadership in Gaza and Israel. May you guide them along the right paths. We ask all this in union with Christ and trusting in the power of your Holy Spirit. Amen. And so as people settle in their seats, it's my great privilege and pleasure to introduce Sister Brigid Arthur and say a little about her before she joins us here in the centre of the church. Brigid is a Brigidine sister, grew up in the Wimmera rural community of Kaniva and was educated at St. Brigid's College in Horsham. After her profession as a Brigidine, she began her long and passionate engagement as an educator, mainly with secondary students in Brigidine Colleges throughout the state of Victoria. A lifelong learner, Sister Brigid continued to study and expand her knowledge and skills in many diverse fields. As principal in a number of colleges and later a founding member of the Brigidine Secondary Schools Council, her passion for education that encompasses and promotes the inclusion and growth of all young people was paramount. In 2001, whilst continuing her work with education, Brigid's hospitality extended to the increasing needs of asylum seekers and refugees in our society. In a less than welcoming climate, her vision for students, all are welcome, began to extend to the needs of asylum seekers and refugees. Now renowned as a refugee advocate and activist on social issues, she was a co-founder of the Brigidine Asylum Seekers Project and has acted as litigation guardian for children. She is also an author, trustee of Kildare Ministries, life member of Catholic Social Services Victoria, and a winner of the 2021 Pro Bono Public Impact Award. Would you welcome Sister Brigid to be our lecturer this evening? Thank you.
Thanks for that very gracious introduction. A bit too fulsome, I think, but anyway, I'll accept it. It's good to be here, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. Can you all hear? Is that clear? Or should I be closer to the mic? Okay? All right, put up your hand at any time if you can't hear me, because I've got quite a loud voice if I want to use it. Okay. I might begin. Now, the topic is the current situation for asylum seekers and refugees in Australia. But I might begin with a couple of introductory points. The first one is, why is the issue of asylum seekers so intractable here in Australia? You know, what's happened? Well, I think part of it is that Australia, or the governments, successive governments, have come to define asylum seekers as a problem of security rather than a humanitarian challenge. In fact, we are known around the world as a country who kind of has found out how to repel asylum seekers, how to deal with them when they get here so that as much as possible no more come, and if we can get rid of the ones who do come, well, that's seen as a plus. There seems to be a strange dislocation between what we know about the troubled spots in the world and the asylum seekers and refugees who come here to seek protection from those wars and places of persecution. A second point, questions for Christians, it seems to me, are: how faithful are we to the God of the Scriptures, where God is not seen as a neutral God, but one who's on the side of the poor and the vulnerable, not because they're more virtuous, but because they have more need. not because the God of the Scriptures is against the rich and the powerful, but showing concern first and foremost for those where humanity is most endangered. And that's often, the term that's used for those people is often the stranger. You know, we read particularly in the First Testament about the orphan, the widow and the stranger. So Yahweh is seen to be saying, be good to them, look after them. And the stranger in that context was people who'd come in from the outside seeking refuge. The outsiders, if you like. And the third point, I think, that I want to make to start with is not can we address the issue of asylum seekers in a better way, but do we want to? Do we have the will to build a society where we look after these vulnerable people, where we acknowledge that life for them is fragile, and where we accept that all human beings are equal, no matter who they are, where they come from, or what their situation is. And those troubled spots in the world, I heard somebody say the other day that they'd counted up the countries, I haven't checked this out, but I expect it's true. They'd counted up the countries where there was quite serious fighting of some kind, either fighting with other countries or internal fighting. And they said there were 46 places in the world. So we have many places where the people are longing for peace, and the asylum seekers that we meet here are among those. So tonight's question, what was it? What's the current situation for asylum seekers and refugees here? I guess a bit depends on how you define current. We could be thinking of current as, you know, the last few decades. But for a start, I'll just talk about current as being relatively recently. I'll start with the Labor government, the time of the Labor government, because when at the last elections, we hoped that a new government would be sympathetic, would make changes, and that the lives of asylum seekers here in Australia would be better, if not perfect, at least better. Well, I think what we could say is that things are better, but they're certainly not really good. So what's better? The first thing I think that's better is that the current government, and therefore it flows over to the current bureaucracies dealing with asylum seekers and refugees, that the language that they use is much better. It's not polarising, not derogatory in the way that often the last governments have a long history of using dehumanising language, from queue jumpers to all sorts of other words, all of which were destined to make people think that these were kind of not worthy people to be feared often, or certainly not ones that we would be sensible to invite into our country. And particularly that was true of those arriving by boat. You know, people were talked about as not being genuine refugees. Well, if you're not genuine, then that sort of has all sorts of connotations that follow. And it certainly stopped people's attitudes on the whole as being, well, less sympathetic. The other thing that I think is better, or was a good thing that happened, certainly is a good thing that is happening right now, is that the 19,000 people who had a Chev visa or a TPV Chev visa. They were 3 or 5 year visas. They had got those, but they were on a rolling, you know, if you had a 3-year visa, you just had to put in for it again, and likewise with a 5-year one. And the Labor government, before they got into office, said that they would change those rolling 3 and 5 years to permanent visas. And those visas are called ROS visas. And that's happening. It's a bit glacially slow, but it is happening. We thought it would be well and truly finished by now, and that all of those people would have permanent visas. They haven't, but they are getting them. I think there's a fair degree of paperwork that's being insisted upon, particularly for some of the Hazaras. That's probably not warranted, but you know, I'm not doing it, but that's from the outside. That's what it seems to me. But at any rate, they are getting these permanent visas, and that's 19,000 people. However, there's another maybe 10,000 who don't fit the criteria for the 3 or 5 year people who now are getting permanent visas. And those folk had either been on Nauru or Manus, or they were rejected somewhere along the line in terms of the processing of their applications, and they're now just in limbo. That we talk about the 10,000 people, whatever it is, it's somewhere in that vicinity. And a lot of those folk are the ones, not a lot of them, a lot of the people that we deal with in our project belong to that category. And they have no income support. A number of them have no work rights, they have no Medicare, and they're totally destitute. And the rest of them are very unsure of what's going to happen to them. They're very unsure because I think nobody knows. So that's another thing that's kind of good for the 19,000, bad for the 10,000. One other thing that's happened recently that you certainly would all be aware of, because it was very much in the news, is the NZYQ case, which came before the High Court, and the High Court members unanimously decided in favour of this man. So who was he and what did that mean? He's a young Rohingya man, and immediately that tells us some things. Rohingyas, as you probably know, have kind of been forced out of Burma, Myanmar. Many of them have. Their places were burned, particularly those in a certain section, certain geographical part of Burma. And forced out, away from their lands, everything burnt, and many of them, millions, ended up in Bangladesh, and they're in a terribly destitute state there. Now this young man, he's just given this pseudonym, but he's a family that was actually subject to that ethnic cleansing. His father suffered a lot. His mother with the other children were forced across the border into Bangladesh, and I understand are there. I don't know this young man. I only know what came out as a result of the High Court case. But the High Court case was about whether you could keep this particular young man, and therefore anybody else who fitted into that same situation, whether you could keep them indefinitely in detention. That's one of the sorts of questions that people who want changes have been asking for 20 years or so. The young man came here in 2012. He was in detention, immigration detention for 12 months. He was then let out into the community. No one is sure what age he was when that happened. He could have been a minor himself because he's not sure of his birth date. A lot of asylum seekers aren't. I think Westerners are the only ones who get really hung up about birthdays. Many people in the world don't know when they were born, certainly not the date. So he got out into the community. He committed a crime, sexually assaulting a minor. He was tried in court and put into jail for over 3 years. And then when he got out of jail, he was put back into detention, and indefinitely. There wasn't any end stipulated. And that was a very big decision by the High Court, because for years and years, the authorities had claimed that it was right, okay, legally okay, to keep people indefinitely in detention. And in fact, that had been tested out in 2004 here in Australia in a famous Al-Kateb case, which found that Al-Kateb, an Egyptian man, could be kept indefinitely in detention. And that's what's been held ever since. So the fact that the High Court was saying, no, if somebody can't be sent back to their own country, then they can't be kept just indefinitely in detention. It was a very major decision, and the Labor Party, Claire O'Neill, who's the Minister for Home Affairs in particular, went into overdrive, and the Minister for Immigration, Andrew Giles, tried to make explanations, but was pretty ineffectual. What they didn't say, I think, I'm sure other people think too, what they didn't say was, A, it's a High Court decision, and really the separation of powers in Australia means that we do what the High Court says. In fact, Claire O'Neill said, if I had half a chance, I'd overturn the decision tomorrow. But what they didn't explain either, and I think a much bigger point, was that here in Australia, when somebody goes to prison among our community, in our society, then they spend whatever time is given to them by the court in jail. And when they get out, they get some help to rehabilitate, and then they live back in the community. For many of them, that's quite successful, and for some it's not, but they have that chance at any rate. For asylum seekers, if they spend time in jail, or refugees, they don't get that chance. They haven't had that chance until now. They are put back into detention with no chance of getting out. When the High Court made that decision, the government had to let those that it seemed to apply to out into the community. But again, they didn't do it very well, I don't think, because while an ordinary person would have somebody to help them rehabilitate, to get housing, to gradually get back into the community, to get a job, whatever, these people got none of that help. In fact, they were just subject to reading in the newspaper all the time how bad they were, and they had bracelets and ankle things put on them. Most had that. In fact, I think they all did for a start. Why were these people still in detention? Because that was the system. They put them back into detention rather than let them out into the community and give them some chance at rehabilitation. I mean, it sounded from the newspapers, and this was kind of aided and abetted almost by the government, that these people were all axe-murderers, or the worst kind of people that you could have. one of the people, and there were a fair number of people with a criminal background for the reason that I've just explained. But there were some amazing people among that cohort that got out. I'll just give you one example. I'll call this man Ali. That's not his real name. Ali, some details here I might just look at. My experience has sort of crossed roads with Ali's a few times. He was coming up 12 years in detention. When he arrived in Australia by boat, he was accused of people smuggling. In fact, he had arranged for one person to actually come on a boat. But he was accused of people smuggling because of that. His wife and 2 sons came separately, and they arrived, and eventually, after being in detention for a little while, they were put into the community, but he was left in detention. And the really sad part about the story was that 2 other sons, they had 4 sons, but 2 other sons coming separately had been in Indonesia. They'd met a friend of mine actually in Indonesia and got to know her a bit. They didn't tell her that they were thinking of getting on a boat too, but they did, and that boat sank. And I was actually in the detention centre in Maribyrnong when news came through that that boat had sunk. It had Ali's 2 sons on it, but it had many other people who had relatives in that detention centre, and it was the worst day I can imagine. There were people weeping, people trying to console each other, people not knowing whether their family was on the boat or not. I think there were about 130 people drowned that day. So Ali has remained in detention, and that's for more than 10 years since then. And I happened then to hear again about him. I used to see his wife and children coming to visit him in detention. Then I heard more about him because he was looking after a totally mentally unwell man in, this time, Broadmeadows Immigration Detention Centre. And Ali was cooking for him, looking after him. The mentally disturbed man would say to him, "Uncle, I'm hungry." And Ali would say, "Your meal is on the shelf, put it in the microwave." Then Ali was one of those let out after the High Court decision. I find myself wondering at times what's happening to that other man, and I don't know. But that's what a beautiful man Ali was. And he was calm through all of these years. He's just been a calm, sort of accepting man. How he could be, I'm not sure. So when the media is sort of making out that all of these people were so bad, I think of Ali. Another couple of changes that have happened after the Labor government got office. One was that the Biloela family were given a visa. And the interesting thing about that, I don't begrudge that family at all that they got a visa. I just wish everybody in their situation also got a visa, because there are many, many other people who could have been given a visa for exactly the same, in exactly the same sort of situation. And then Neil Parra, you might remember reading about him, he walked to Sydney and he got then news, I think when he was nearly there, that he'd been given permanent residence. And people started coming in to us saying, "I'm going to walk to Sydney." Is that all you have to do? You have to walk to Sydney? I'm going to walk to Sydney. Why were those people given visas? Well, wasn't it good that they were? But there's no more reason why they would get visas than all of the people who haven't. So my point is, the system is shambolic. The minister, one minister actually said, "I don't feel comfortable having these godlike powers." And it is true, the minister can make any decision that they want to. Another political change that the Labor government has just announced is that the AAT, can't think what it stands for. Anyway, it's administrative, you're right, okay. And that's going to be changed to the ART. Do I know this one? Administrative Review Tribunal, I think. There's so many acronyms and you get so used to just cutting them short. So this ART, which is a new body, to review, those bodies, those tribunals are there as a possible review of government decisions. So they're really, really important to people whose only chance is, having been rejected, to have their case looked at again. And this new body, which is going to be legislated on in the middle of the year, I think, that's supposed to be going to be better, fairer, whatever. But we have heard that before, so we'll have to wait and see. So overall, the clear message from this current government, I think, is that asylum seekers are not a priority and they don't want the issue to become part of the election sort of dialogue, debate. And you can't blame them for that in a way, because once it begins to be an election issue, then usually the worst things get said and get out into the public. I think I'd like to tell a few stories just to humanise these people. I don't want to go on for too long because I would like you to have an opportunity to ask questions or to put a point of view. But I'll go on for a bit longer. One of the things that's often missing, I just tried to do that before a little bit with the Rohingya man. I'm not saying that he was the most moral person around, just trying to say he was young, maybe a minor when he was out in the community, but certainly very young. He'd already gone through a whole being part of an ethnic cleansing situation, the horror of which we can only dream of. You know, his family are in a terrible situation. He's had very little of, or almost none, of the sort of normal growing up. You know, when you put that in context, at least it looks a bit different to just this person who's not given a name, just an acronym, and who's not given any details about who they are, but just kind of painted as a monster. So just to humanise some people at least. There's a 95-year-old man, and I think I can talk about him because if you know him, it's all right. He was a beautiful man, Ron Brady, and he lived not too far from where our centre is. And he rode a bike round. Everybody knew Ron because he was 95 but still riding a bike and still looking after himself. And he asked us if there was any person who needed a room, any asylum seeker who needed a room, to just point them to him. And so we asked him to take in a young man whose name was Zia. And Zia, who was 17 at the time, I think, he was certainly a minor. And he mightn't have even been 17. He went to school at any rate, at St Mary's in St Kilda, I think. And he and Zia and Ron got on really, really well together, amazingly. And eventually, not too long ago, Ron died actually, but Zia had moved off to Wagga to get into a university there and do a social work degree, which he's finished recently, and he got his permanent residence, and all coincided. He got permanent residence, he also was found to have cancer, he got his degree, and Ron died. Sort of all at the same time. So it was kind of just an up and down sort of story. But Zia rang not too long ago and was very happy because he'd been found the doctors had found that he's probably free of cancer, but then, and he managed to get his degree, he managed to get permanent residence, and then he broke down and said, yes, but it's all because Ron looked after me. It was just such a beautiful story, kind of a rounding out of, and who knows what will happen next. Zia's a young Hazara bloke. Two young women arrived at our place, not together, separately, but both from Uganda recently. One, a young lawyer, and just a lovely young woman. She'd arrived in Australia, I think in September of last year. She had no idea of where to go. She'd been in trouble in Uganda because she worked for both the police and the government. She wasn't too sure of who was actually threatening her life, but they were. She was really scared and scared for her family. And she left Uganda, arrived here in, I think it was September. She had no idea of what to do or where to go, and she had no money. And she said an old man on a railway station, her English is okay, so she was telling him of her dilemma. She did know one place where somebody had told her she might be able to get a room for a while. She'd come with $1,000 and that's all. And this old man took her by the hand. Mind you, all young people say old, and they mean much, much, much younger than me, so I'm never too sure. But anyway, it was supposed to be an old man. And he took her by the hand and took her along a certain distance and pointed to the place and said, or pointed to the tram or train, whatever, and said, that's where you go. And she was so impressed by this. But then her money quickly ran out. She was exploring Melbourne, but not finding anywhere where she could get help, just learning bit by bit. And then she was on a railway station again, and a man, obviously from Uganda, came up. And she said, I'm looking for help because my money's running out. And he said, you can come and live with me. I was down a fair way down in the country. And she was a bit scared, but she said yes because she didn't have too many alternatives. And she went down there and he absolutely took advantage of her, demanded sexual favours and kind of almost locked her in. Luckily, he was going overseas and he went for a while. He left her with his dog to look after. And she's the sort of person, she said, I couldn't leave this poor dog with no one to look after, so I had to wait until he came back. But in the meantime, she'd come up to Melbourne a few times. She'd found our place. The first time she got there at 7 o'clock at night, and she said everything was closed up. So she went back on the train, came the next day, came at a good time and came in and saw us. My advice was, leave straight away and come, and that's when she said, I can't leave the dog. But as soon as the man came back from overseas, that morning she arranged to be on the train and came to Melbourne. And she will make it, but she's, going from knowing absolutely nothing, having very little money. Some come even with less than that, but she did at least have a little bit. but it ran out very quickly. No, I won't tell you the other girl story because time's going. What else should I say? I just want to talk a little bit about, maybe about one of a young girl. There's an Hazara man by the name of Sadiq who's gone through a really, really hard time here in Australia. Wife died of cancer back in Pakistan, where he'd moved the family. His eldest daughter was abducted and burnt to death. And then he had 4 other children, and he had a terribly hard time, which luckily we were able to help him in, to get those 4 children to Australia. And about a year ago they arrived. And the eldest boy, immediately they got here, they got jobs in a meat factory and a meat shop, and I forget where the other girl is. But anyway, two of them, 3 of them went to school. One to a tech school, but working in the meat shop as well. And the youngest 2 at school. And again, the youngest boy got cancer just after he arrived. And all that Sadiq is saying now is, oh, we are so lucky that he got to Australia when that cancer was found. He would be dead if he was still overseas. But the next girl, one who's 17 now, they came to see me the other day and she didn't come. And I said, why is she not here? Why didn't she come with you? Because she studies every minute of the day. Often when I hear of these young kids, I was a teacher, and she's doing the sort of subjects that I taught, and I think, I would love to have had some of those kids in my class. I can't remember any kids who wouldn't go somewhere on a Sunday afternoon because they were too busy studying. She's in year 11, she wants to be a doctor, and she will make it. She mightn't become a doctor straight away, but she will make it. These are young people who are given half a chance. The eldest boy has just gone back to Pakistan and married. But it will take him years to get his wife out here. But he was very happy when he arrived the other day, saying, no, I will work hard, I will work all the time. He's got to now show that he's supporting his wife and supporting her family and keeping the family going here, because Sadiq, who worked so hard for many, many years, is kind of just almost not able to work anymore. His health is so poor. And he's saying, no, Dad doesn't have to work. We will work and it'll all work out. I mean, the sort of courage of these young people leaves me absolutely astounded. Maybe I'll just talk a little bit about the changes that I think we need. I mean, you could go on for hours on this, but one, every step seems to be unacceptably slow. People wait for, even when they're told they're about to get permanent residence, it goes on for ages and ages before the next thing, before they hear the next thing. So many bad decisions have been made in the past and they need to be revisited. Bad decisions like 2 twins came together on a boat. One got a visa and the other one's still on a bridging visa. One got permanent residence and the other got a bridging visa and is still, now has no visa at all actually. The government has put on new staff. They said 500, I think, this time last year, but it doesn't seem to make all that much difference. So we need things to be speeded up, we need things to be cases to be revisited, and we need changes in legislation so that the bad things that have happened can't happen again. Some of us are trying to get a Royal Commission to look into the system where so many end up in detention for such a long time and so on. Whether that will ever happen or not, I don't know, but it's worth pushing for. I think I might, yeah, that what I just said about we need things to be changed so that they can't go on happening. One of those things is how much money we're spending. You know, we're spending an extraordinary amount of money to keep evil things in place. I think that's awful. For example, there was 1.4 billion in the 23-24 budget to keep the onshore, people in detention here, to keep those places open, with $1 billion increase every year. But there's also 486 million just to keep Nauru open. And we've made a contract with a firm called MTC that's got a very dubious record overseas of various forms of corruption. So there are also things that need to be changed. I think I'll stop there because you might have gone to sleep by now for all I know. Okay, so we might have some questions. Bill?
Questions?
Or comments. I don't have all the wisdom. You might like to say something. Just, it's not a question.
Okay, we've got a roving mic on the way. So hands up or stand up if you've got a question. Father John will put a microphone in front of you.
Sister Brigid, I'm quite worried now with these senior children who are on or don't have visas, and like Amir's who is in year 10 and wants to go to university or further study. Have you got any ideas of where we go now?
Yes, young people now, if they were on Nauru or Manus or have been rejected along the line, can't go on to university unless they pay. It's not really true that they can't go to university. They can't go unless they pay. Well, most people can't pay. Most Australian families couldn't pay the whole fees to have their kids at universities. I mean, one point is that the universities themselves have been very, very generous, I think, extraordinarily so, at offering scholarships. So there are a lot of people who wouldn't otherwise be at a university, but they're there through the graces of the university. The only other thing is, this is one of the changes that we need to bring in. There's no other answer, I don't think. But it is sad. In fact, I'll tell you one little story. One kid who just found out that his brother was about to go to university and then he couldn't for this reason. And then there's one in year 11 and one in year 9. And the year 11 kid said, I'm not going to try anymore. What's the point? If I try hard and I pass it at year 12 and I should be going to university and then I can't go, so what's the point? It's a pretty big disincentive to other kids.
Sister Brigid, I'm wondering about the people who came from Ukraine. I didn't know, I can't recall what the limitation was on the time they could stay, but I've got a feeling it might be 2 years. And is that mean we'll have a lot of people who have to be reassessed because of the situation still in Ukraine?
The people who are coming from Ukraine and also probably Palestine, certainly true from Ukraine, are on what we call a humanitarian visa, and that's it's not a protection visa the same way as the ones I'm talking about. In technical words, it's not as a result of an 866 application. I mean, the numbers don't matter. They're brought in by the government with rules of their own, and our project, most of the projects like ours, don't have anything to do with them because they're sort of government sponsored and government looked after. So I don't know what the future for them is, nor indeed do I know what the future of any of them is, but certainly don't know what the Ukrainians are actually being told.
Given that these people have no, those not on visas, are not allowed to work, they have no support from the government, no Medicare, they're reliant on people like yourself or your group to provide them with food, clothing and whatever. How do you get funding? How do you secure your funding? And can we help?
Yeah, they're mainly the people. We're dealing with two main groups of people at the moment. One are those who are just arriving, like the two young Ugandan women I talked about. It's quite a number of them. They come by plane. Well, they come by plane always, but often they come for a conference or something, and then they stay on. But they have to get into the country somehow with a tourist visa or a student visa or whatever. That's one group. But the other group are those you're describing who've kind of been rejected at each point and have been left now without any visa at all, or they're waiting for the federal court decision. Once they get to the federal court, it's kind of all over in terms of are they going to get permanent residence or not. And it's extraordinarily difficult. I mean, we are housing, we've got two sorts of housing. One, houses that we've either been given or people give us for low rent or whatever. We call those BASP houses. And then another group of people, which happens to be about the same number, where we actually pay the rent for people who have their own houses, but they can't pay the rent because they're not getting any money. So that's about 270 people, and roughly 135, 140 in each of those two groups. But of course, it's not just a roof over your head if you've got no money. It's food and it's money to do all the ordinary things like top up your phone bill, like get a Myki card, like pay, if you happen to have a car, pay registration on the car. It's all the sorts of things that all of us have to pay. And as much as possible, we're supporting as many people who come to us as we can. But we're not saying yes to everybody now. We simply can't. We don't get any money except for donations. There aren't many. We give a bit of cash to those who've got none. There's only a few groups. No one gives cash, I don't think. We don't give too much. It's $100 a week if you haven't got anything else at all. But the other groups who are also trying to help, Asylum Seeker Resource Centre, and then Babcare, Uniting Care, and some of the others don't have much coming and going. We try to move people on as soon as they can get a job and move on. We try to move them on so that we can take in new people. Sometimes it feels a bit heartless, but we know that if, when they really, really, really try and there's no alternative, some can make it independently. So we're not very popular when we say, no, you've got to now, you've got to move on. But we're trying to do that so that there's at least some housing becoming available for other people. But it's extraordinarily hard, and it's awfully hard to look at people and say, we can't help. Awfully hard.
Sister, are you aware of any community, or how many communities there are out within Australia that would take these asylum seekers or refugees if the government would allow them to?
How many? I didn't catch the first
communities within Australia would take the asylum seekers if the government would allow them to?
Yeah.
Is there any?
No, I don't know. Simply, I don't know. But, it's amazing how, I don't know whether this is really answering what you're bringing up either, but how many country communities have actually embraced people coming in reasonable numbers. You know, in a place fairly close to where I come from, Nil, you'd all know that story about people coming to work in the rubber duck industry. And they've revitalised the town totally. There are Filipino workers who are, I think it's Pyramid Hill. There's lots of young meat workers. You know, there's lots of places that have actually, well, but for that to work, it has to be a reasonable number of people who are moving to the one place. We find it hard to get people to go to the country because even though they're not very well off, they at least know a few people in Melbourne. But if you're asking them to go to a country town or region where they know no one and they're only taking it on your word that there's a job there and that some people might look after them, you know, it's a big leap of faith. So we find it really hard to convince them to have a go at it. But a few do, a few do. Is that what you were asking? I'm not sure.
Basically, it's sort of looking at, it's, you know, they take this big leap of faith anyway when it comes to Australia.
Yeah, that's right. Would they go? Yeah. Look, I think, yeah, that's right. I think the answer is that if there was a will by government, I think government or leadership, you know, whether it's state government, federal government, local government, I think there has to be initiatives taken by people who've got the ability to make things happen. And if there was enough will from the various levels of government to make some of these things happen, I mean, to make those changes that I was talking about before, you have to have a government that's willing to risk being unpopular for a while. If they all want to be popular all the time and, you know, their only aim is to get back into government or to stay in control, to stay in power, well, nothing's going to happen because they're all going to take the line that we don't want to get out of, you know, out of favour. And if you're not willing to get out of favour at all, then nothing happens, I think. So, you know, when you think back to changes in going back to the scriptures, and for those who have a Christian background, I mean, the prophets were always out of favour. They were always thundering away at everybody, telling them how bad they were, and nobody liked them. They tried to kill them every now and again. I mean, Jesus wasn't in favour a lot of the time, and in the end, you know, they did, the powers that be did do away with him. So, you know, if you're going to stand on the right side, there's not a real bright future, is there? I didn't mean it to sound as bad as that.
If there are no more questions, and I can't see hands because my eyes aren't that good, so I'm relying on Father John. If one more, and then we will have supper and you'll have an opportunity to ask Sister Brigid directly if you have any other questions. Thank you.
Sister Brigid, I hear your stories and all the phenomenal work you do, and I despair at our country and what we've become. How do you sustain hope in the work you're doing? How do you keep going in this space when it can be so frustrating and depressing?
Oh, thank you. Sometimes I say I'm just stubborn, I think. Yeah, look, I know sometimes it does sound as though it's absolutely hopeless, but enough good things happen, and with perseverance, you know, enough people do eventually make it. Now, they've got to go through, you know, a lot. Most of them. Hardly anybody gets to be accepted in Australia and given permanent residence unless they've really suffered. Hardly anybody. You know, many have been in detention. That's cruel. Many have been without much money. Many have been without work. Many have been not knowing where the next meal was going to come from. So they've been through a lot. But many make it too, eventually. You know, a man rang me up just last night and he said, "This is Hussein here. You remember me, Hussein?" Well, Hussein's nearly like Muhammad, you know. I mean, there would be at least 3,000 of them, I'm sure. So I said, "Oh yeah, give me a clue," kind of. And he said, "Remember, Hussein detention centre 2001, and then he stopped for a while. No, 2002. That didn't help me all that much. Although I did remember one instance of 3 men who jumped ship, and one of them was a saint, so whether it was him or not, but I don't know. But anyway, he's coming to see me, so I'll get a bit clearer then. But you know, he was so delighted that now I'm married, now I have a child, I've got citizenship now. I said, have you got PR? He said, no. And I thought he was going to say, still on a bridging visa. I thought, no, not from 2002, surely. He said, no, hasn't got PR, he's got citizenship. And, you know, it is amazing how people can, the human spirit is extraordinarily resilient. Now, having said that, we break some people and they will never recover. So that's the dark side of the coin. But the bright side of the coin is that in spite of all, there are many who go on here. They'll be the beginning of a whole new dynasty, whole new family of people. And they'll tell the stories our Indigenous people now tell of what happened to their forebears. You know, it won't look good for Australia, but it'll be their story. I think that's all I can say. Thank you.
Sister Brigid, you began your talk by talking about the volume of your voice. I can assure you that even when you whisper, you have a very loud voice. And we thank God for it. And we thank God that you were here tonight to share your voice, and in particular, your voice of prophecy in speaking truth to power, and the voice that you use to support refugees and asylum seekers in this country, in a country where we are so well off and yet we have such a shameful record of hospitality to the most vulnerable people on this planet. There are 3 things I want to thank you for tonight on behalf of everyone here. The first thing is simply being here with us and being your presence with us and allowing your voice and your light to speak and shine among us tonight, to share your stories, to share your understanding, and to share your mercy and compassion, and a little bit of your ministry among refugees and asylum seekers. Secondly, I would want to thank you for the advocacy on behalf of refugees and asylum seekers and the voice that you give them. I know some among whom you have worked, and I know what your ministry and the ministry of Brigidines has meant to those people. And finally, I would want to thank you for being our voice and for being our advocate. Sometimes we simply don't know what to do, what to say, how we can address the situation, how we can make things better. I thank God that we have someone like you who do speak for us when we feel as though we are voiceless and we can achieve so little, even though we want to address the situation that we find our nation in when we see the cruel policies that have decimated the lives of so many. So thank you for being with us. Thank you for being a voice for the vulnerable. And thank you for being our voice. When you go down the back for supper,